The quiet of the house was heavy that morning, yet beneath its calm lay a storm inside a mother's heart. Toan's mother had always believed she knew what was best for her son, what kind of woman was worthy of standing beside him. And Ly Tu Diem, fragile yet resilient, was not the choice she had once imagined.
When she decided to hire a tutor for Tu Diem, her mind was divided. Was it an act of kindness or a test? Deep within her, Prejudice whispered cruel doubts. She will never belong here. But another voice, softer yet persistent, reminded her of the courage she had seen in Tu Diem's eyes, the quiet dignity in her suffering.
Every lesson the tutor gave was not just for Tu Diem, it became a mirror of the mother's own heart. Would she allow tolerance to bloom, or let prejudice chain her forever? In the fragile balance between pride and compassion, will Toan's mother learn to see the woman her son truly loves, or will her heart remain closed? The evening light fell gently across the wide windows of the Nguyen household. In the quiet of the living room, Madame Lan sat alone, her thoughts circling endlessly. She was Toan's mother, a woman who had built her life on discipline, pride, and the belief that her son deserved only the finest. Yet, ever since Tu Diem stepped into their lives, her heart had been unsettled. Tu Diem was fragile, with the kind of innocence that carried scars too deep for words. She had no polished manners, no higher education, no family name to speak of, nothing that matched the standards Madame Lan had always envisioned for her son. And yet, Toan insisted on protecting her, cherishing her as though she were a treasure. That night, as the clock ticked steadily, Madame Lan found herself torn. Her eyes wandered to the small notebook Diem had left on the table. The writing inside was clumsy, the letters uneven, almost childlike. A pang of pity struck her heart. How could this girl ever walk beside Toan in the world of business dinners, partnerships, and high society banquets? Still, something in Diem's quiet determination haunted her. She remembered the way Diem bowed politely, the way her gaze lowered out of humility, the way she whispered thanks for the smallest kindness. There was sincerity there, something rare, something money could never buy. And so, the thought took root. What if Diem could learn? What if someone could guide her, step by step? Hiring a tutor could mean Tu thinks it could help Diem grow, or it could expose her limits. Madame Lan's heart tightened at the choice. Was this an act of kindness, or simply another test of worthiness? The struggle within her deepened, between pride and compassion, between prejudice and tolerance. The mother of Toan sat in silence, knowing that whatever decision she made would shape not only Diem's future, but her own heart as well. The next morning, Madame Lan woke earlier than usual. The thought of the tutor lingered in her mind like a shadow she could not shake off. As she prepared her tea, her hands trembled slightly, betraying the storm she carried inside. On one side, her old beliefs rose like a wall of stone. Tu Diem was born poor. She carries no refinement, no background, no lineage that could stand beside the Nguyen name. Hiring a tutor felt almost absurd, like polishing a stone that could never shine. The prejudice in her heart whispered, "This girl will never belong. No amount of lessons can change her roots." But then came another voice, quieter yet stubborn, the voice of compassion. She remembered Diem's face when Toan introduced her, a mix of fear and gratitude, as if she was terrified of taking even a small place in their home. She remembered how Diem clutched a book in her hands, though she barely understood the words, desperate to learn, desperate not to shame the man who stood by her side. As the tea steamed in her cup, Madame Lan closed her eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to admit something. It wasn't Diem she feared. It was the possibility of her own heart softening. Because if she chose tolerance, if she chose to help Diem, then she would also have to face the truth that her son's love for this girl might not be a mistake, but destiny. The conflict tore at her like two hands pulling in opposite directions. Prejudice urged her to protect her pride, to safeguard her family name. Tolerance, however, reminded her of Toan's happiness, of the simple kindness reflected in Diem's every gesture. That morning, As the sun broke through the curtains, Madame Lan knew she could no longer delay. She would hire the tutor, but in her heart, she still did not know if it was an act of generosity or a final test to prove her fears right. The tutor arrived on a quiet afternoon, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a voice that carried patience. Tu Diem sat nervously at the table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, the way a child waits for judgment. Madame Lan stayed in the background, pretending to read a magazine, though her eyes often lifted to watch every small movement. The first lesson began with the alphabet and simple phrases. Diem stumbled at first, her tongue heavy, her handwriting crooked. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment each time she made a mistake. But instead of giving up, she pressed forward, repeating every word until her voice grew steadier. The tutor smiled. "You learn quickly, Diem. You only need courage." Those words lit something inside her. For the first time, Diem allowed herself a small smile, shy, fragile, but bright. She clutched her pen as if it were a lifeline, determined to prove she was not hopeless. From across the room, Madame Lan watched with mixed emotions. At one moment, her lips tightened in disapproval. How clumsy she looks, how far she is from grace. But in the next moment, she found herself startled by the fire in Diem's eyes. A spark of will that no hardship had managed to extinguish. Each day, as the lessons continued, the contrast deepened. Diem's hands were rough, her manners unpolished, yet her effort was relentless. The tutor often praised her progress, and every word of encouragement seemed to wash away a little more of Diem's fear. Still, Madame Lan's heart remained a battlefield. Pride urged her to dismiss it all as an illusion, but tolerance whispered, "Look closer. Can you not see the strength in this girl?" And so, with every passing lesson, the struggle inside her grew sharper. She had hired the tutor to test him, but now, she realized, the true test might be her own heart. One rainy afternoon, the sound of droplets tapping against the window filled the study room. The tutor had just praised Diem for reading an entire paragraph without stumbling. For a moment, pride flickered in Diem's eyes, quickly replaced by tears she tried to hide with her sleeve. Madame Lan, sitting nearby with her teacup, noticed. "Why are you crying, Diem?" Her voice was firm, almost cold, but curiosity betrayed her tone. Diem lowered her head. I am not crying because of sadness, madam. I am crying because I never thought I could learn. I was always told I was worthless, that knowledge wasn't for someone like me. But now, if I can learn even a little, maybe I won't shame Toan. Maybe I can stand beside him without lowering his head in front of others. The room grew still. The tutor, moved by her words, remained silent, letting the truth linger. Something stirred inside Madame Lan. She had expected excuses. Maybe empty flattery, but what she heard was honesty, raw and unpolished. The girl did not dream of riches or power. She only longed for dignity, for the right to walk beside the man she loved without being a burden. Lan's heart trembled. She tried to sip her tea, but her hand shook, spilling a drop onto the saucer. Memories of her own youth returned, the struggles, the humiliation of proving herself in a world that judged her by her background. Had she forgotten that pain so easily? For the first time, she saw Tu Diem not as a threat to her family's name, but as a young woman fighting quietly against fate. And in that moment, the hard edges of her prejudice softened, just a little. Yet Lan was not ready to surrender completely. She tightened her jaw, hiding the warmth that threatened to rise in her eyes. Still, the wall she had built for so long had begun to crack. Days turned into weeks, and the lessons continued. Each evening, the house grew quieter, but inside the study room, voices rose, Diem's halting at first, then stronger, steadier. The tutor praised her often, and every small success painted light across Diem's face. Madame Lan no longer pretended to read when she sat nearby. She watched openly now, though her expression stayed guarded. She told herself she was only observing, making sure the effort was not wasted. But deep within, she knew the truth. She was no longer watching for failure, she was watching for hope. One evening, As the lesson ended, Diem carefully bowed and whispered, "Thank you, madam. Without your kindness, I would never have dared to dream of learning. I know I may never be worthy of Toan's world, but I will always try to be a woman he does not need to be ashamed of." The words pierced deeper than Diem could imagine. Madame Lan turned away quickly, hiding the moisture that gathered in her eyes. Pride still held her tongue, but her heart betrayed her. For the first time, she felt not only compassion, but respect. That night, alone in her room, she sat before the mirror. In her reflection, she saw not just a strict mother guarding tradition, but a woman confronted by her own fears. Prejudice had been her shield, yet tolerance was slowly becoming her answer. She had not fully embraced Tu Diem, not yet. But the seed had been planted. And though she would never admit it aloud, Madame Lan knew each lesson was not just shaping Diem, it was reshaping her own heart. The question remained, lingering like a whisper in the night. Would love and patience be enough to dissolve the last fragments of her pride? Only time would tell. Prejudice and tolerance are often born in the same heart. Prejudice grows from fear of losing pride, fear of judgment, fear that the world might change. Tolerance, however, grows from compassion, from the ability to see another person not for what they lack, but for what they strive to become. Madame Lan's struggle is not unique. It is the struggle of every person who must choose between the safety of old beliefs and the courage of an open heart. At first, she saw only Tu Diem's flaws: the rough hands, the clumsy words, the absence of refinement. But slowly, through the girl's determination and sincerity, she began to see something greater: the dignity of effort, the quiet strength of humility, and the honesty of love. The true lesson lies here. No one is defined only by where they come from. Human worth is not written in background or status, but in character, perseverance, and kindness. Prejudice blinds us to this truth, while tolerance allows us to witness it. In the end, Madame Lan did not change overnight, but she took the first step, and sometimes, that is enough. For when a heart begins to soften, walls begin to fall, and love finds its way where pride once stood. Tolerance is not the absence of judgment, it's the choice to look beyond it. In life, it is easy to measure others by what they lack, to let pride whisper that we are higher, stronger, or more deserving. But true strength is found in the willingness to understand, to offer a hand instead of turning away. Tu Diem's journey reminds us that effort has a beauty of its own. Every shaky word she read, every tear she held back, was a step toward dignity. And in those fragile steps, Madame Lan discovered something unexpected. Compassion does not weaken us, it humbles us, softens us, and reveals what truly matters. Prejudice builds walls, but tolerance builds bridges. Where walls divide, bridges connect. And sometimes, the smallest bridge, a kind word, a patient gesture, a willingness to give someone a chance, can change two lives at once: the one who receives grace, and the one who gives it. Thus, the lesson is clear. When faced with the choice between pride and compassion, choose compassion. For pride protects only the self, but tolerance nurtures love, and love is the one truth that can heal every wound.